All right, music fans. It is I, Dave, the real music observer, observing real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. This is going to be a very self indulgent video because I'm going to tell you why I like the band Poco more than I like the Eagles. That's right. I talk a lot about the Eagles because there are a legion of Eagles fans, and then you have that Don Felder problem that's still going on out there. Uh, I tweeted out to Don Felder that he might want to call Rusty Young and see if he wants a lead guitar player. I think that would be so delicious and ironic, but he didn't take my advice. Rusty Young, by the way, the only original member left in the band Poco, has got a fantastic solo album available on Blue Elan Records, which I gave a plug for a while ago. But, you know, when I start to get back to the basics when it comes to music, I go back to 1980. That was a year where I was just so engaged in the music around me, and vinyl was very important to me. And I was a member of the beloved Columbia Record and Tape Club, and my shipments were always LPs. I didn't have a car as of yet, very soon, but the albums, I mean, I had those babies in a nice little stack and with the seams out and so forth so I could read the titles. And I remember getting this shipment, and I did it based on one song I heard off of this album. The album is called Under the Gun, and the band is Poco. It's a black album with a classic horse logo in red writing, and it was like the album of that summer for me. I just played it backwards and sideways, couldn't get enough of it. There was a tune called Midnight Rain that was on the radio, like I say, but the title track, Under the Gun, was just this giddy-up country rocker. And at this point, Poco was a band that was made up of, it was kind of like Foreigner. You had two guys from Great Britain and two guys from the States, Rusty Young and Paul Cotton. By the way, Paul Cotton, one of the great unsung guitar players, plays like Stephen Stills, but maybe even just a tad better. Was in a band called the Illinois Speed Press before joining Poco in the early 70s after Richie Furay and Jim Messina had flown the coop. And that's where you start with this group. You start with a band where you've got a drummer by the name of George Grantham. You've got Randy Meisner, who of course would later join the Eagles as a pattern was developing. You've got the aforementioned Rusty Young playing probably one of the best pedal steel guitars in rock history, okay? And then you've got Richie Furay and Jim Messina. This was obviously an offshoot from what was happening in Buffalo Springfield. These guys wanted to be pioneers, and they were. Before the Eagles were eagling, Poco was making authentic country rock, sometimes with R&B and sometimes with a psychedelic side to it. I believe there's one album that Poco did where almost the entire side of the record, it's probably side 2, is this long experimental track which just, you'll never hear music like that being made again. You just won't. It's progressive, it's psychedelic, it's country. It's just using your instruments that you have, and you're making noise which probably had never been made before up until that point. Of course, they would go through a lot of transformations. Meisner would leave and join the Eagles. Lo and behold, Timothy B. Schmidt would join up with the group, and eventually he would be plucked from Poco, which, by the way, set the stage for Poco's biggest album, where they first used that horse logo. And that album is called Legend, and it features two of Poco's biggest songs, Heart of the Night and Crazy Love. But that album is just chock full of goodness. Tunes like Barbados. I remember listening to that. After I had gotten Under the Gun, I actually went backwards and bought that album and had the two albums with the horse logos, which to me, I just wanted a t-shirt that had that. I wanted stuff that had that. It was just the coolest thing. And at that point, I really fell in love with their sound. Rusty Young has this nice falsetto. Again, he's still singing today. And Paul Cotton, a little grittier. The two of them were sort of like the Lennon-McCartney of the group for a number of years until Paul Cotton left. Paul Cotton comes back again, but then Paul Cotton has left for good. Randy is still with his band, and he's got all new players. But the albums that I listened to, there was this album called Ghost Town that came out not too long after Under the Gun, which was absolutely brilliant. I liken it to an Old West version of Hotel California, whereas the Eagles were trying so hard to be, fitting in with mainstream rock. Poco continued to create music that was somewhat adult contemporary, but it was also still really tied to their country roots, even when they lessened off the countryness of their sound, which they did, because prior to the Legend album, they had a string of albums with Tim Schmidt, with things like Rose of Cimarron, which really were unique and groundbreaking, but still had a very heavy-duty country sound, but not by today's standards. It was just roots rock by what people call country today. It's an amazing band, Poco. Again, Under the Gun to me was I could play that album from start to finish. And today I actually ordered it because it finally became available on CD with a Blue and Gray album. So I get two albums for the price of one. Blue and Gray is this tale of the Civil War. It's a concept album. Again, it's brilliant. They had a string of albums nobody played in the early 80s on MCA before they went to Atlantic, and then kind of got treated the same way on Atlantic. They have another album on Atlantic called Inamorata, and then they came out with an album called Legacy. I believe it was called Legacy, with all the original guys in the late 80s, and a tune called Call It Love. Richard Marx, I think, did some production on that record. And Randy Meisner sings on that album. He sings a power ballad, which, again, there's so much good stuff. And then Poco revived again later on in the late 90s, and then they did a lot of touring and so forth. And they're still out there. It's mostly Rusty Young and some guys that have been with the band for maybe 10 years or so. Not as good as the original Poco, but yours truly had a chance to see this lineup. I believe it was like 2010. I was at the Wolf Den, which is a place at Mohegan Sun, and got to hang out and talk with my heroes, and it was one fantastic night. So, for my money, the catalog, too, is just so big. I mean, if you're an Eagles fan, great, but Poco, you can dive into their catalog, and they have so much music to listen to. It's just fantastic. All right, so I'm just a big Poco nut. I'm just letting you know that's where I stand on it. I like Poco better than the Eagles, and I'm on record as saying that. So there you go. All right, I'll be back with more real music talk in real time for real people just like you right there, and just like me. We'll do it real soon. Talk to you.